authorization or any actual declared war continues to hang over every member of the armed services that was and is engaged in this chain of command. Congressman Mike Quigley, Democrat of Illinois, is a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman Joaquin Castro, Democrat of Texas, serves on the Intel Committee as well as the House Foreign Relations Committee, and they both join me now. Congressman Quigley, let me just start with you. I know I believe neither of you gentlemen have seen this video, but do you believe it should be made public to everyone?
Yeah, what's amazing here is that the Committee of Jurisdictions hasn't seen it. Some members of the House Armed Services have seen it in the Senate, and I don't know of anyone else. So the intelligence committees have not seen this. Not only should we see it, the full House should see it, and frankly, the American people have a right to see it.
Congressman Castro, you have spent a lot of time thinking about counter-narcotics in the Western Hemisphere. And to the extent there's an argument here, it started out by saying fentanyl kills a lot of Americans, which is true. And therefore, there's this, it's a war and these are narco-terrorists. But the closer you look at this, the more that's fallen apart. It was, if there were drugs there, it was cocaine. It's not clear it was going to the U.S. Is there any conceivable genuine counter-narcotics rationale that you can see here?
Well, let me put it this way. If there is, Chris, the president and the administration have not provided it. And this has been the most secretive administration in modern American history. They are refusing on some committees even to send Republican chairs, witnesses from the federal government. And I agree with Mike that we ought to all see that footage, and the country should see that footage because it looks like war crimes have been committed. And, especially when you have a vote that's going in the opposite direction, you refuse to name the people that you've killed. You refuse to name any evidence or cite any evidence or any charges against them. You're talking about very possibly war crimes.
Congressman Quigley, I want to read you this part of the account and get your reaction to it. Military officers said the survivors could have been trying to beckon to other alleged drug traffickers in a plane or boat to come get them, communications that could have justified the follow-up strike that killed them. Others have said they appeared to be looking up into the sky to look for the American plane that had maybe done this to them, possibly waving up to surrender. What would you like to learn about what happened here, and what should be the sort of public reckoning with this?
Look, the first thing that has to happen is we need the intelligence for why they're doing this. How did they get intelligence to make the decision they made? What do they know about this? When we were talking about counterterrorism, we were doing drone strikes. Obama put in a level of near certainty that they were absolutely certain this was the person involved and they were a danger to the United States. We don't have a clue as to what the intelligence was, how it was gathered, what was their level of certainty. So the fact that the intelligence committees haven't even been briefed on this tells us that this is a message of secrecy. You're not to know about this. This is our secret, dirty little war. And the problem was the film got out.
Congressman Castro, you just talked about the word war crimes, and I don't think that word is at all hyperbolic here. In fact, many experts on the law of armed conflict have said that they think that's what we're talking about here, that was even the case before this second strike, that these are fundamentally illegal and unauthorized killings. What do you think about legal liability here? I mean, again, it seems far-fetched. We've watched Hollywood movies where members of the chain of command had thought about this, and there's been entire dramas about whether they would be liable. But given the fact that we've now this strange constitutional structure invented by John Roberts and the majority in the court, that the president isn't legally liable, how do you think about the very real criminal and legal exposure here for those members of the chain of command?
I think everybody from Pete Hegseth to Admiral Bradley to anybody who executed these strikes needs to be concerned about legal liability. And as you know, Chris, throughout the history of American conflicts and wars, there have been service members and soldiers and others who have gone overboard, who have committed war crimes, and who have been held responsible by Americans, by the legal system, for those actions. And I think that we're at the point where, quite possibly, there is legal liability in the future for folks. And to your question about the drugs, I don't know how the president would say that this is about combating narco-terrorism or drugs when he pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, who trafficked or helped traffic 400 tons of cocaine in the United States of America. It's complete hypocrisy, it's recklessness, and it's lawlessness.
Congressman Castro, to follow up, did that shock you? I mean, did you see that coming? And did anyone in Congress see that coming when you saw that social media post?
No, I didn't. But there's a lot of things about Donald Trump at this point that just don't make sense, right? A lot of hypocrisies. But I didn't know why he would do that. I do think that part of it was that he has become very aggressive with Latin America, interfering in elections in Argentina and now Honduras, and also threatening Mexico, Panama, and of course on the verge of taking us into war with Venezuela. That's why Jim McGovern and I have a war powers resolution to withdraw from any war with Venezuela if that in fact happens. And so he's destroying our relationship and our place in the Western Hemisphere with Latin America.
Yeah, Congressman Quigley, on that, I mean, there does seem to be, there's obviously a huge buildup. We've got carrier groups down there. We've got an enormous amount of naval assets there. We have now killed 80 individuals on these boat strikes. The president has sort of all but, I think, explicitly threatened war, a regime change war against Maduro. You're on a committee that usually has a kind of pipeline to the administration that's different than others in terms of intel, and you've got some experience there. And it sounds to me like you guys are also kind of floating in the dark here. Is that a fair characterization?
What's the old line? I only know what I've read in the newspapers. That's particularly true with being on the Intel Committee. This is my 9th year. It is becoming more and more, quite honestly, useless. I don't know that we're getting the information that we used to get, and I know that I don't necessarily trust it. So to expect that we would be getting any information that's necessary, quite honestly, I tell the American people, members of the Intel Committee, members of Congress, know just about as much as you do about these critical affairs. And it's high time that my Republican friends stand up and say that has to change, and we have to recapture our constitutional powers of appropriations, of oversight, and clearly of war powers.
Congressman Mike Quigley and Congressman Joaquin Castro. Gentlemen, thank you both.
Thank you.
Coming up is